As many of you may know, the release date for Armored Core 6 is rapidly approaching, and I think a lot of us are incredibly excited to play this game, especially after the awesome story trailer and gameplay trailer they put out. That's what I like to see from software. Give me more transhumanism. Something a lot of you may not know, though, is that a lot of mech game fans really need Armored Core 6 to be good. The state of mech games, especially in recent years, has been pretty dire, and if Armored Core 6 flops, there's a pretty good chance we won't see studios trying to break into the mech genre again anytime soon. On the flip side though, if Armored Core 6 is really good, then developers might actually have a pretty good idea on what people actually want to see out of a mech game. So I'm going to briefly take this video to talk about the landscape of mech games for people who might not know much about them. I'll start off with some games that are really in my wheelhouse, Gundam Games. One of the better Gundam games we have active at the moment is Gundam Battle Operation 2. This is a team-based action game where players pilot different mobile suits from all of the Gundam franchises, with each suit having a different power value and only certain values being allowed in a rotating match list, so that weaker suits do still get a chance to be played. This game actually does a pretty exceptional job at making the mechs feel nice and weighty, sometimes a little too much in my opinion, but this is a facet a lot of mech fans really enjoy in their games. The game is also free to play, which means anyone can pick it up as long as they've got a PlayStation 4 or 5. The game is also technically out on PC, but it has unfortunately kind of been riddled with problems since its PC launch. The other downside is that due to the game being free to play, all the suits are randomly pulled by using a purchasable or earnable currency. This really kills the game for me, as I'm not a huge fan of gacha games in general, no matter how generous their currency handouts might be. But if you don't mind this so much, then this really probably is the best Gundam game of the moment for actually feeling like you're piloting a big robot. Unfortunately, every other Gundam game only becomes more niche from there. It doesn't help that there's been a fair few Gundam games that have taken spins on games that work well, and have tried to appeal to a wider audience, and have fallen flat on their face. Namely, Gundam Versus and New Gundam Breaker, both of which have players preferring their previous older iterations over the new ones. Myself included, as I love Extreme vs. Maxi Boost On, a version that, while it came to the West later than Gundam Versus, had been available in Japan for much longer. But Maxi Boost doesn't really have that mech game feel. At its heart, it really is an arena fighter. Another well-received game that came out recently was SD Gundam Battle Alliance, which is a fun little crossover event where we can see characters from different Gundam series interact. But if you're not a Gundam fan, the bare-bones combat and basically non-existent customization is not going to give you the mech fix that you want. Speaking of crossover games, there are actually some other recent well-received ones with SDG Generation Crossrays and Super Robot Wars 30, but these aren't action mech games either, they're turn-based strategy games. And of course, I can't talk about Gundam games without talking about Gundam Evolution, the 2022 team-based hero shooter featuring mobile suits from all kinds of different Gundam franchises. I could talk on end about how its egregious monetization made it incredibly difficult for free-to-play players to ever get all the mobile suits, how the uninspired skins were generally underwhelming, how the login reward and events gave you minuscule currency for loot boxes and skins with only the most minimal amount of changes off of the base skin, or how the most glaring fault, in my opinion, of having the only skins people actually want, the ones that are featured iconic forms of the suits, require an insane amount of duplicate currency you can only acquire by opening loot boxes and taking, anecdotally, around $200 to $400 worth of loot boxes to acquire the amount needed. But I've actually already kind of talked about all that in a previous video, and if I'm being completely honest, the fact that the game is shutting down less than a year after launch kind of speaks for itself. Okay, so Gundam games are kind of a bust unless you want to play old games, have an interest in turn-based or fighting games, or want to play a gacha game. So where exactly can we get mech action combat these days? Well, there was some buzz recently about a franchise returning with a new iteration, and it was a franchise that was actually pretty well loved, Hawken. That's right, Hawken Reborn came and went fairly recently as a free-to-play reboot of the older game. However, the main thing the devs seem to have thought people liked about the original Hawken was the obscene monetization. However, to go with the monetization, Reborn also featured barely improved graphics over the original that came out over a decade ago, somehow clunkier controls, and not in a good way that we sometimes get from mech games, and no multiplayer. But hey, it's early access, but I can't say my hopes are high. Speaking of early access, a game I actually liked a lot in early access was Galahad 3093, a game I played a couple closed beta tests for. It was actually quite fun and featured some impressive customization. However, the game edged along in early access and pre-release for quite a while and released with very little fanfare earlier this year. Since then, the dev's consistent updates have all but stopped and the player base seems to have dwindled significantly. However, it is also free to play, so maybe it's worth hopping in for, but it doesn't appear to be the mech game we were all holding our breath for. Okay, but it's not all doom and gloom, I promise. There are actually a few good mech games, though they don't quite hit the action game notes I think a lot of us want out of something like Armored Core. First off, in the strategy realm, there's Front Mission Remake and Phantom Brigade and Battletech. While I can't speak directly on the Front Mission Remake as I haven't had a chance to try it yet, the reviews certainly seem really promising. Phantom Brigade and Battletech I have played, and both are actually quite fun, and I would highly recommend them. And now I want to swerve past the strategy games once more to actual action mech games that I think hit the closest to what a lot of mech fans really want. First off, there's Mech Warrior 5, which if you want slow, beefy, hardy mechs, this is absolutely the game for you. It's honestly quite stellar, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit, though the slow speed isn't exactly my favorite thing in the world. I mean, I'm a 4-answer fan after all, and I need the speed to go up to 11. There's also Mass Builder, a game that feels like it's been in early access forever, but it's still quite good. The customization in this game is absolutely stellar, like a cut above. And while the gameplay and story is incredibly bare bones at the moment, if you ever enjoyed perfecting and changing your perfect mech for hours in Armored Core games, then this game's customization is worth it. The game that I think reaches closest to Armored Core at the moment is Daemon X Machina. Daemon X Machina? I never learned how to say it. A great game that even gets featured in one of my favorite games ever, No More Heroes 3. This game actually takes a ton from Armored Core games specifically, especially the 4th gen games, and puts a cute little anime aesthetic over it. The gameplay can be a little awkward at times, with the non-existent melee combos from the Armored Core games feeling incredibly dated by the time this game came out in 2019, and the constant managing of like 5 different types of resource meter. The story also seems to take an incredibly long time to get anywhere, but the fast speed and stellar fights, both with large bosses and other arsenals, more than gave me the Armored Core fix I had been missing. Though now this game has been out for 4 years, and there really hasn't been much like this since. Okay, well, what about Armored Core? Obviously we can still go back and play the old games, right? Well, sort of. Though if you want to play any of them digitally, your only available one right now is Armored Core Verdict Day, and only if you still have a PS3 around and don't mind the weird workarounds you have to do to purchase things on the PS3 store. But on the plus side, there's been huge steps in actually making the Armored Core games emulate well, and the awesome people on the Armored Core Discord have a ton of resources for how to do it, and have even managed to set up multiplayer in the 4th gen games. Definitely check them out if you want to give these a shot. And you should, they're really good games. That being said, I recently replayed 4-Answer on stream, and these games are starting to really show their age. While the customization and gameplay is quite good, the environments and visuals range from quite ugly to just bare bones. There are some great set pieces, for example, any mission with the Vanguard Overed boost is always a huge spectacle, and a couple of the later missions have really great stages, but look too closely at any of the other environments and you can kind of tell there's a lot to be desired there. So that's why a lot of us mech game fans really want Armored Core 6 to be good. The current landscape just isn't great. Your best options are really old games that are still super good, games that aren't really action games, games that are just trying to be anything but mech games, or games that are just cashing in on the franchise name. Even the good action mech games either have a super limited player base or are starting to turn half a decade old already. And even the Armored Core games we remember so fondly are starting to become relics on their own. It really doesn't help that the idea of a mech game encompasses such a large swath of things that even games that do fit into what we would call a mech game can feel and play entirely different. Personally, I don't know what my perfect Armored Core 6 looks like, but I do know there's been a bit of a drought in quality mech games coming out, and if there's a game that can fix it, it's Armored Core 6. And given what we've seen of the game so far, it honestly looks amazing, and I cannot wait to play it. I'll be playing it a bunch on stream if you want to catch that on release weekend. Definitely tune in, and I'll try to have a ton more videos out on it once it releases. Thank you all for watching.